Welcome! This is Dr. Plague, and today I just want to take a little time to talk about some upcoming videos and how I format some of my code written in C. I plan on creating some future videos in which I show you some code that I have written, so I believe this subject seems appropriate at this time. Now, to be clear, I'm not turning my YouTube channel into a coding channel, but there will be upcoming projects which contain microcontrollers and stuff, such as a homemade flash memory programmer, among other projects. So I'll need to write some code for those. I believe that an electrical engineer should be somewhat of a well-rounded jack of all trades. It's okay to specialize in something specific, such as some area of analog electronics, but it is always good to know a little about other stuff too. For example, you may want to control an analog circuit with a microcontroller, so I believe you should know how to do that. You don't need to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. You could always be a jack of all trades and a master of one. The purpose of this video is not to teach you how to format code, but rather to just show you how I do it and why, so you won't need to question it in future videos. Now, just as a disclaimer, I'm not a software engineer, but rather I'm a hardware engineer, so my coding skills may not be as polished as others. But nevertheless, I do have quite a bit of experience writing code for several companies, mostly firmware, but some software also. And to be clear, what I am going to present is my own personal preference. I'm not saying that my ways are right and other ways are wrong. I format code in a way that makes sense to me, and I'm not trying to change anyone's mind if they disagree with me. I like to look at the pros and cons of different formatting styles, and I generally choose the style with the greatest pro to con ratio. No matter which formatting style you choose, staying consistent is always a good rule of thumb. So first, let's look at the following. Where do I place the curly brackets? Like this or like this? Obviously, there are more choices than this, but these are probably the two most common styles. Now, I know a lot of people have some pretty strong opinions on this, but do we place the opening bracket at the end of the opening line or at the beginning of the following line? The way I like to do it is like this. I place the opening bracket at the beginning of the following line. It just makes sense to me. That way the opening bracket lines up on the left with the closing bracket. It makes it easier to locate the matching bracket. There are those who claim that it is easy to find the opening bracket that is placed at the end of an opening line by looking at the line indentation. But that's not always true. Many times I have seen code where the indentation is all messed up due to some indentations created by spaces and others by tab stops, which doesn't always line up, especially if you're not viewing the code in the same editor that the author used. This happens a lot when code is placed in forums or sent in emails. If the indentation is off, then for me it's much easier to spot a bracket when it's at the beginning rather than the ending of the line. Way back when I learned how to program, this is how we were taught to do it. In fact, pretty much every book that I have on C and C++ show the brackets lining up like this. Let's take a look at some of them. These are just a few of the books that I had back in college. For some reason, it seems like most programmers choose the other style nowadays. Personally, for me, placing the bracket at the beginning of the following line looks less cluttered and creates a nice visual break. The other way just makes me uncomfortable. And many times when someone sends me code like that to review, I'll need to reformat it in order to comfortably read it. Some of the reasons I've heard for placing the brackets at the end of the opening line are that it saves vertical space, and that it conforms to the formatting style for a team of programmers. Although I will agree that if you work in a team, you should follow the formatting style that everyone else is using. But that doesn't explain why it is better to place the brackets at the end of a line. As far as saving vertical space, that used to be a valid issue back in the day when computer monitors could only display a limited number of lines. But nowadays, our monitor resolutions allow for a much higher number of lines to be displayed, so I don't see this as an issue anymore. Also, if we want to save vertical space, then why not place the ending bracket at the end of the previous line like this? I think that would look quite bad, so I wouldn't do it there, just like I wouldn't do it at the beginning. And if I want to save vertical space, I could always move the following lines up, like this, and accomplish the same thing while keeping the brackets lined up on the left. Therefore, I see no advantage to not line up the brackets on the left. And the only way I would even consider formatting it that way is if the code between the brackets was very short. That way it would be easy to match the brackets. If you can think of any actual advantages for placing the opening bracket at the end of the opening line, then please share it in the comments. Just as a side note, I have heard a rumor that the practice of placing brackets at the end of a line stemmed from a book publisher who chose to reformat some code against the author's will in order to better facilitate the formatting of the book. Whether this is true or not, I'm not certain, but it does make sense to me that this could be true. Now, one more thing concerning the opening and closing curly brackets is that if I only have one line of code following an if statement or while loop, etc., I'll many times leave out the brackets. There are some people who strongly feel that this is wrong, but in reality, you see this all the time in practice, and even in books. This can actually save a lot of vertical space, and I have no problem reading code that is formatted like that. One issue that people will have with this is that if you add any more lines of code in the future, then you may forget to add the curly brackets and create a bug in your code. In reality, I have never forgot to add the curly brackets when needed, and anyone with programming experience should recognize that they need to add the brackets with additional lines. If I know I'll be adding additional lines in the future, then I will just add the curly brackets right away. But if I'm fairly certain that it'll remain one line, then I'll just leave them out. Now, the second thing I'd like to look at is this. How do I indent a switch statement? These are probably the two most common ways. Do I indent each switch case within the brackets like this, or leave them at the same indentation like this? Actually, I leave the switch cases unindented from the brackets. So I use this style. The other style is probably more common, but the problem is if we start adding too many levels of indentation, then the lines can become too long. Ideally, each function should be as simple as possible, but occasionally the indentations can become fairly deep. I find it much more difficult to scroll left and right than to scroll up and down, and I really hate looking at code that has been word wrapped. Therefore, I like to keep the code as short as possible in the horizontal direction. Some editors or IDEs like to format code in specific ways, and sometimes I have to fight with them over my switch formatting style, but I try to remain consistent. The third and final item I want to cover is how I add comments. There are two basic ways to add a comment in C. The first is to use a double slash, which comments out everything to the right of the double slash on that line. There is also a multi-line style comment with a slash asterisk at the beginning of the comment and an asterisk slash at the end of the comment. Generally, I'll always try to use the single line double slash comment style for adding in comments. I'll save the multi-line style comments for commenting out portions of code during the testing and debug phase. You see, if you have multi-line style comments in your code and try commenting out a portion of the code, then it doesn't work. At least it doesn't work with any compiler that I use. The code will only be commented up to the first asterisk slash. Now, I could use #ifdef directives, but you can't always easily see what code has been removed that way. In my editors, code that is commented out using comments will show up in green like this. And I do know that some editors are configurable, but I'm not going to get into that. So, this was just a quick video to show you some of my code formatting styles. And hopefully, this will help to answer some future questions that people may have concerning my style of formatting. If you disagree with any of my styles, then that is perfectly okay. So keep doing what you're doing. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, right here on Dr. Plague.